I became fluent in Spanish to spite an ableist and got her expelled from college. Background: some members of my family are deaf or hard of hearing, which runs in our family, so we all communicate using American Sign Language. American Sign Language was my first language, and I had to attend speech therapy because I rarely spoke out loud at home. Even now, when I feel overwhelmed, I sometimes accidentally revert to signing. In my city, almost everyone attends the two large state universities in the area. The ableist girl and I eventually ended up at the same college. Approximately 2 years ago, when I was 16, now 18, I had a confrontation with a girl, then 18, now 20, whom my friends were spending time with. She claimed that American Sign Language is not a legitimate language and argued that she knew Spanish, which she described as filled with rich culture, which it indeed is. However, that does not justify her saying that American Sign Language is not a real language with its own unique culture. She suggested that it was a superpower I did not possess. This led to a rift in our friend group over whether I could claim to be bilingual. At that time, I was quite shy and reserved, so I did not advocate for myself. I turned to the amitheasshole subreddit to determine if I was overreacting. Many individuals responded to my post, reassuring me that I was neither overreacting nor in the wrong. I understood that deaf culture is incredibly rich and diverse, but the encouragement and validation from these strangers helped me process what had occurred more fully. Elements of deaf culture, such as deaf slams, devia, and the nursery rhymes I grew up with that might seem foreign or peculiar to hearing individuals, were all components of my identity. When I tried to explain this to the girl, she refused to listen. Even some of those I considered friends suggested I was mistaken, dismissing American Sign Language as a trivial course. This infuriated me. I had witnessed my family face ableism throughout my upbringing, and I had fought for my family from a young age, only for my friends to turn against me like that. I confronted this girl and asked, "If American Sign Language is so simple, why don't you learn it?" She replied that it was not worth her time and insisted that I should study a real language. I was furious, but realized she had inadvertently acknowledged that American Sign Language was challenging to learn. I was 90% certain she recognized she could not easily master American Sign Language. It was then that I resolved to learn Spanish to demonstrate that my first language was indeed valid and significant. I visited the library and checked out Spanish books. I enrolled in the free paid language program my library offered. I also took dual enrollment Spanish classes at a local college, and when I later entered college, I tested into Spanish Level 3 and continued my studies. I obtained a job unrelated to my language learning quest, and many of my coworkers spoke Spanish, allowing me to learn cultural nuances and slang. This experience helped me avoid sounding like I was reciting from a textbook. I set my phone to Spanish and communicated with people online who only spoke Spanish. After about a year of immersion, my coworkers told me I sounded quite proficient. Learning English upon starting school initially helped ease my learning process. I found Spanish to be a beautiful language. I decided I needed to enhance my efforts even further. I began watching movies and reading books almost exclusively in Spanish. I frequently visited the Hispanic neighborhoods in my city and made new friends there. I informed them of my intentions right away. I was a bit concerned they would react similarly to the other girl regarding American Sign Language, but they were incredibly supportive and affirmed that sign languages are authentic languages. These new friendships helped me distance myself from my old friend group. I still hung out with the previous group occasionally, but it was not at all like it had been before. My new friends understood what it was like to face prejudice in a world where their families did not understand or speak English. They recognized what it felt like to straddle two cultures and to serve as translators from a very young age. I could relate to them extremely well. By the time I had spent nearly 2 years learning the language, I had nearly forgotten my original motivation for studying Spanish. Then, I received a message in the group chat that included the ableist girl. They wanted to film skateboarding clips for another guy's Instagram. It was going to be him, another kid, the ableist girl, and me. I realized this was the perfect opportunity for my revenge. When I arrived at the gathering, everyone except the girl was present. The rest of us were conversing when she approached us. After filming for a while, We sat down for a water break. We started discussing school and random topics. Then she mentioned how teachers did not understand her because her brain worked differently due to being bilingual. Another person commented that she was merely bilingual and not on the spectrum or anything similar. While I disagreed with that statement, it seemed odd to bring up autism, but it provided me with the perfect opening. She launched into a passionate rant, asserting that none of us could possibly comprehend what she goes through. Keep in mind, her native language is English, so she wasn't struggling with that in school. I told her I spoke multiple languages. She exclaimed, "What? That communicating with your hands doesn't count. Is this a sign?" She fumbled her hands, mimicking gibberish and asking if that was an English word. She was laughing hysterically, as if this were something I hadn't heard since I started attending school. I responded in Spanish, utilizing the colorful curses I had picked up from working in fast food with disgruntled coworkers. She claimed I had only recently learned those phrases and that I did not genuinely know Spanish. We then engaged in a heated argument, completely in Spanish. By the end, she was yelling at me, leaving the other two people quite confused. I explained to them that I learned Spanish out of spite to validate that American Sign Language was a legitimate language. I claimed that Spanish was an easy language, which was a lie, as it is quite challenging, and I asked her why she hadn't learned the glorified Morse code I communicated in. She then delivered the most satisfying retort I have ever heard. "But you already knew another language, so of course it was easier for you." She attempted to backtrack after I caught her in that statement, but it was too late. She was already throwing a tantrum. I told her that American Sign Language and deaf culture were just as valid as Spanish. Following that explosive argument, we all simply went home. In the days that followed, I received an influx of messages arguing that American Sign Language was not a legitimate language, but also that it was easy for me since I was bilingual. I ignored all of them and blocked her. She then started sending me direct messages, which I also blocked. Eventually, she began emailing me through the school messaging system, where blocking is not an option. I was not particularly affected by her insults directed at me, but then she began to speak disparagingly about my family. She referred to them as defective, used the R word, and described them as incapacitated. She mentioned my younger brother, who is hard of hearing and only 11 years old. That was the last straw. I approached the dean with evidence of her behavior, as her full legal name was tied to everything. They were able to locate the messages in the system. They assured me that immediate action would be taken, emphasizing that such behavior was unacceptable. She lost her scholarship and was placed on academic probation. Subsequently, she began ranting about this on her public Instagram account, perpetuating her ableist rhetoric, which did not go unnoticed by the school. Consequently, they expelled her entirely and offered me the chance to speak to a counselor, along with a scholarship for children of deaf adults, CODA. I declined the counseling and the scholarship, although I genuinely appreciated the gestures. When the first semester concluded, I applied for a paid internship, where I was able to list my knowledge of both American Sign Language and Spanish. I now earn around $10 more than my colleagues in the same role who speak only one language. The friends I made throughout this journey of revenge are incredible. I have immense affection for them. We have only grown closer in the aftermath of all this drama. In summary, a girl claimed that American Sign Language wasn't a language while declaring that Spanish was because she spoke it. As a child of a deaf parent, I learned Spanish over 2 years, forming close friendships with Spanish speakers. When I spoke Spanish to her, she had a meltdown that ultimately led to her expulsion from the school where she was close to receiving her associate degree. Story 2. Aita for going off on my mom and cutting her off. I understand your concerns, so please allow me to clarify my situation before you react strongly. A bit of background. I am a 21-year-old female, and my mother is 42. I moved out of her home a little over a year ago when I was 20. At that time, I was dealing with significant personal issues. I had recently exited a deeply emotional and at times physically abusive relationship, lost 70 pounds due to not eating and vomiting from panic attacks and anxiety, and spent time in the hospital twice due to stomach problems. I was still in the recovery process when I started a new job in January 2024, having been unemployed for about 9 months. As I mentioned, I was navigating a lot and required time to heal. Although I did heal to some extent, my relationship with my parents was strained during that period. We were constantly arguing, and I often isolated myself in my room or avoided being home altogether. I hoped that once I secured a job, our relationship might evolve into a more amicable friendship typical of adults in their 20s, but that was not the case, and disputes continued. Eventually, I moved in with my grandparents while I worked at a collision repair shop. During that time, I met my current boyfriend, and we quickly decided to live together. He was kind enough to let me move in with him, and we got along wonderfully. After moving in with him, my relationship with my parents significantly improved. They adored him, appreciated that I was employed, and were pleased that I was no longer living at home. We even enjoyed a mini vacation together over the summer, and my relationship with my mother felt closer than ever. Then, in August 2024, the other receptionist at my job quit, leaving me to manage opening and closing alone. I became overwhelmed and subsequently quit my job, a decision I now consider foolish. At that time, I had no savings because I tend to struggle with money management, and my boyfriend's car broke down, requiring an additional $1,000 to replace. I lent him the money, knowing he would repay me and believing it was not a significant issue. Fast forward about 3 to 4 weeks, and I began to regret that decision. My boyfriend was incredibly supportive. While he wasn't thrilled about the situation, he did not express any anger. I shared the news with my mother, and she was similarly understanding and eager to help. I started visiting my parents every Wednesday to pick up my younger sister, who is 10. I would spend time with her until my parents returned home from work. Some days, I would simply visit my mom, who sometimes worked from home. I would look for jobs while she worked, and we would watch shows, talk, or just enjoy each other's company. When I couldn't visit during the week, I would make sure to call, and our conversations would last anywhere from half an hour to an hour. I cherished these interactions. My biological father is not a positive presence in my life. That's a story for another time, and we have no communication, making my close relationship with my mother even more significant to me. She felt like my best friend. Now, fast forward to about 2 weeks ago, at the beginning of February. We have a museum in our state, about an hour away, that is renowned for being excellent and caters to children. They offer a promotional deal on Friday afternoons, where ticket prices are halved. We plan to take my sister, who finishes school early, on that day. Our discussions about this outing lasted a week, and my boyfriend even planned to leave work early to join us. On the week of the event, I visited my parents on Tuesday and Wednesday, stayed at my apartment on Thursday, and had my boyfriend drop me off at my mother's house Friday morning on his way to work. Though our trip was scheduled for 2:30 or 3 o'clock p.m., I wanted to make things easier for my mother since my boyfriend worked near their home. When I arrived, my sister was waiting for her bus, but she was acting strangely. Normally, she would eagerly jump into my arms upon seeing me, yet this time she barely acknowledged me. I asked if something was wrong, and she insisted everything was fine. My mother had already left to take my brother to his private high school, which does not provide busing. Concerned, I texted my mom to inquire about my sister's behavior. My mother replied that my sister was upset because we weren't going to the museum, and she didn't want to tell me for fear I would be angry. I couldn't understand why I would be the one upset about not going to a children's museum. I was simply thrilled to have an activity planned together. In truth, I wasn't upset about the canceled museum trip. I was frustrated because I had woken up early and had been dropped off for the 3rd time that week without a reason. I enjoy spending time with my sister, but I sensed she was in a mood, and she often becomes unkind when that happens. I felt disrespected. It would have been courteous for her to message me the night before or even that morning to say, "Hey, sorry, but we're not going today. Let's plan for another day." So I responded politely, communicating my feelings as I had above. In return, my mother called me to say, "Well, let me just take you home." I agreed, wishing to return instead of dealing with the tension. Initially, my boyfriend had offered to take me home because it was Friday and he had a light workload, but my mother insisted on picking me up. As we drove, I remained quiet, not having much to say. I wasn't angry, just annoyed and exhausted. However, around 5 to 10 minutes into the drive, she suddenly began berating me. She brought up incidents from when I was 15 and made hurtful comments about my life. I calmly asked her to stop and requested that we not discuss it at that moment, but she insisted that I lacked control, which was never my intent. I was simply trying to establish a boundary. Her comments crossed a line and were deeply hurtful, and I communicated this. Instead of pausing, she ramped up her attack to the point where I lost my composure and yelled at her, telling her to be quiet in a way that felt extreme. She then flipped the narrative to make it seem as if I was the unreasonable one who instigated this argument, which was not true. Initially, I had merely texted to express my mild frustration over her lack of communication, especially after being dropped off at 7:00 a.m. This was where she revealed her perspective. She claimed this behavior defines my character. She stated things that felt deeply personal and targeting my insecurities. I was blindsided by these comments, especially since we had been getting along so well for the past few months. I thought we had become best friends, so it was crushing for me to hear such hurtful things, especially considering my biological father is absent, my stepdad and I don't have the best relationship, and my younger brother has unfavorable feelings toward me. Being close to my mother and sister meant everything to me, and her sudden shift to verbal attacks left me devastated. Yes, I retaliated with hurtful words as well, but I was calm initially. I was polite and composed until it became unbearable. Now, I seek advice on whether I should reach out to her again. When I attempted to text, she dismissed my account of events, suggesting my narrative did not align with her perspective, despite my belief that I was accurately representing what occurred. It has now been 2 weeks since I've seen my mother or sister, and I miss spending time with my sister. I recently learned my sister had a week off, during which my mother took her on various outings, knowing I was jobless and at home, yet I wasn't invited. My mother has not offered a genuine apology for what happened, and we have not adequately discussed the incident. She even messaged me yesterday with an unrelated inquiry about a plane crash, as if nothing had happened between us. I find myself at a loss, feeling like a burden to everyone and grappling with this feeling for several months. I struggle to maintain a job because nothing seems appealing, and I lack a clear passion that would prompt me to pursue a college education, especially considering the financial difficulties that come with middle-class life, which my parents faced, and that I want to avoid. I feel lost in terms of my aspirations and deeply unsettled about feeling unwanted in various aspects of my life. Visiting my mom's house twice a week and spending those hours, there was the one place where I truly felt safe and able to share anything. Though I love my boyfriend, who is incredibly supportive, he sometimes struggles with emotional awareness, which can leave me feeling misunderstood during these challenging times. At this point, I genuinely need guidance as I feel profoundly down. Any advice would be appreciated. Story 3. A friendship between 3 neighbors going sour, me. 45M neighbors, 60 SF, 90 SF. Me, 45, male Betty, early 90s, female Sally, late 60s, female summary. My elderly neighbor Betty has formed an unhealthy attachment to me and has started to exclude others from her life. This behavior has been particularly distressing to our other neighbor Sally, who has cared for Betty for over 10 years. The full account. My spouse and I have relocated across the country twice in the last couple of years, and it has been quite hectic. We were pleased to find some stability for a while. When we initially viewed this apartment, we met Sally, late 60s, female, who resides a few doors down. She has been incredibly kind to us and shared quite a bit about our mutual neighbor, Betty, early 90s, female. It was evident that Sally held a special affection for Betty, as they have been next-door neighbors for 15 years. Due to a medical incident about a decade ago, Betty is housebound, and Sally takes care of her mail and leaves fresh fruits and vegetables in a basket at her front door. They maintained a positive neighborly bond. Betty is quite an eccentric individual. She proudly stated that they had never been inside each other's apartments. A couple of months after our move, Betty introduced herself by knocking on my door to ask for assistance with a piece of furniture that had toppled over. After that, she would seek help roughly once a week with various tasks. I eventually started driving her to her medical appointments. I valued this new friendship, as it helped me adjust to our new home and city. She has been a supportive friend, even if she has a rather unique personality. It became apparent early on that Betty had very loose boundaries. She is a free-spirited person who enjoys discussing intimate topics and shared stories about her self-discovery. It was also evident that she was developing a strong attachment to me. She is aware of my sexual orientation and appreciates my relationship with my husband. However, she often makes comments about my appearance and throws out suggestive remarks. Initially, I dismissed these as harmless quips from an eccentric elderly lady and laughed them off. Despite this, we forged a friendship. I enjoy her stories about her travels and her love for art, among many other topics. I realize I have devoted many words to the complications, but we have genuinely enjoyed a good friendship over the past year and a half. Approximately a year after our arrival, Betty experienced a medical emergency. She managed to crawl to her front door during the night, and Sally found her in the morning and called for an ambulance. Sally was deeply upset and visited her in the hospital every day, and my husband and I joined her in those visits. Sally played a crucial role in preventing Betty from being sent to a rehabilitation facility, as she feared Betty would become trapped there and deteriorate. Betty's niece, who lives in a nearby city, came to help her transition back into her apartment. For a couple of months, Betty received regular visits from aides and therapists. I visited her daily, and Sally would drop her mail off each day. Sally also arranged for Betty to have a medical alert bracelet. As a side note, Betty has no recollection of her hospital stay. She knows she was there, but has no memory of the events that transpired during that time. A few months later, Betty had nearly returned to her normal self. My husband wanted to share our holiday meals with her, so he prepared Thanksgiving and Christmas dinners that we brought over to her apartment to enjoy together. I would have liked to invite Sally to these meals, but by that time, I had begun to feel uncomfortable vibes from Betty. She made subtle remarks about Sally, suggesting she was not pleased with her. This attitude intensified over the following months. Betty accused Sally of lying to her in an effort to make herself look good. For instance, she claimed, "Sally told me that when I was in the hospital, I referred to her as my best friend. I would never say that." Sally must have made that up to enhance her own image. In reality, while in the hospital, Betty was under the influence of medication and said many amusing things. However, the notion that Sally fabricated the story for her benefit is absurd. Betty does not recall her hospital experience. She seems to ignore or deliberately forget that Sally found her and effectively saved her life by visiting her daily. Instead, Betty fixates on my husband and me visiting her during her hospitalization. During that time, I attempted to casually remind Betty of how valuable a neighbor Sally is and how helpful she has been, but Betty was not open to it. Eventually, Betty asked Sally to refrain from entering her apartment with the mail, preferring that it be left in the basket at her front door. A few weeks later, she requested that Sally not collect her mail at all and asked me to take over. Betty stated that she did not want Sally intruding on our time together. There were only 3 occasions over a few months when Sally briefly came to deliver the mail during my visits to Betty. Each time, Sally stayed less than 2 minutes, but this still irritated Betty. I confronted Betty about her sudden aversion to Sally. She launched into a lengthy, disjointed tirade. She criticized Sally's tattoos and claimed she used to be a drug addict. She recounted innocent anecdotes that I had heard before, but added a sinister twist to them. Sally has been completely excluded, and Betty has said some quite hurtful things to her. On the other hand, Betty's attachment to me and my husband has only grown stronger. She frequently inquires about details I've shared over the past year and a half and makes exaggeratedly positive comments, declaring me the most attractive man she has ever seen, insisting I am perfect, that our lives are flawless, that my marriage is the ideal relationship, how delightful the holiday meals were, and asking about each of my friends, wondering whether I have spoken to my mother recently, and so on. While I appreciate the encouragement and positivity, it has reached an absurd level. It is challenging to converse with her when so much of her energy is directed toward praising me. There was a young aide in the apartment complex who used to assist her, but she has since replaced that person with me. If she happens to be on the phone when I arrive, she excitedly ends the call to spend time with me. She has numerous old friends and relatives who care for her and call often, yet she refuses to allow any of them to visit. Though she takes great pride in her appearance, it is evident that she prefers solitude over having others around. There is one other neighbor across the parking lot with whom she has a friendship. He is around 70 years old and retired. They communicate through text and phone calls, and he occasionally brings her baked goods, but never enters her home. She has shared many things about him, but insists that she never discloses anything about me. It feels as though she is trying to keep me hidden and reserved solely for herself. On a recent visit, I accidentally interrupted a call with this neighbor. Afterward, she mentioned she would call him back. I suggested she tell him about how I had helped her with various tasks. I am eager for this other neighbor to know who I am and to be aware that I am part of Betty's support system so that we can collaboratively ensure her well-being. I dislike feeling isolated, especially while we are attempting to care for this elderly individual. A few additional details. Betty is estranged from her daughter. While she is generous with her finances, she becomes quite offended if someone does not behave according to her expectations. She has been married 3 times and ended each marriage. She possesses a strong character and has triumphed over many adversities. I admire that aspect of her, but I am starting to question whether her strong-willed nature has negatively impacted her relationships. Conclusion. This presents an emotionally intricate situation, and I struggle with handling other people's feelings. I want to ensure that Betty is well cared for and thriving, but I despise the way she has callously severed ties with Sally. This is not only painful for both Sally and me, but it also places me as the sole in-person support for Betty. To safeguard my well-being, I have reduced my visits to every other day. I am concerned that this all sounds irrational, but we are a small community that genuinely looks out for one another. This incident has shaken us, and I am unsure how to navigate it. I want to assist my elderly neighbor, reassure Sally, and maintain a positive relationship with her. Thank you for any guidance you can provide. Story 4. Is this a red flag? Is this a toxic relationship with that person? I don't know what to do, and I am feeling bad while writing this. I understand that this question may seem obvious or silly, but I am uncertain about what to express. Hello, I am an 18-year-old male university student. I have generalized anxiety disorder and attention deficit hyperactivity disorder, along with frequent intense stress. I have been under the care of both a psychiatrist and a psychotherapist for several years. I have finally managed to cope with social interactions after extensive training and medication, including some psilocybin. This is my first year at university. Initially, the crowds overwhelmed me, but I can now handle them quite easily. I have transformed significantly compared to the person I was a year ago. I have become much more functional than I was last year. I can now engage in conversation with someone for a few minutes before I start feeling drained and become unstable, impulsive, and socially awkward. The latter terms are particularly relevant. I can sometimes display socially awkward behavior, akin to someone with ADHD rather than someone who is autistic or anything similar. I encounter some challenges when speaking, and I do not articulate words very well. I have located a therapist and may begin therapy this year, although that remains uncertain. At the start of the year, I told myself that I should strive to be socially adept before putting myself in social situations where I might earn a negative reputation or something similar. This was my perspective at that time. As time passed, I met many individuals. While I never formed close relationships with them, we did engage in conversation now and then in small groups for specialized courses. At some point, I noticed a barrier between myself and them that seemed to emerge when I attempted to get closer. I believe this is a consequence of my generalized anxiety disorder, attention deficit hyperactivity disorder, and overall struggles with pronunciation. It diminishes my confidence, and people perceive me as somewhat different. Therefore, I have never genuinely attempted to breach that barrier. Sometimes I attend classes alone, and other times I go with a few individuals. In the weeks preceding the exams, I grew closer to someone I had known for about a month. He seemed genuinely interested in various topics and could potentially become a great friend. Without making much effort, we gradually began spending more time together during class and in between classes, but never outside the university campus. I started to enjoy his company and have fun with him during every class, but some disturbing thoughts started to cross my mind. He easily mocks others when they go to the board or ask questions, uttering phrases like, What a ridiculous question. He is unbearable. At that time, I didn't consider it significant, but it soon became increasingly important to me. I began to sense that he was somewhat detached from reality. I am genuinely concerned about social issues, ethics, and concepts of equality and inequality, while he seemed indifferent to all of this. However, that wasn't the most troubling aspect. Approximately a month after we started spending time together, I began to realize that we were consistently testing each other, always trying to gauge each other's reactions. I found myself joking about some professors with him, something I had not done previously. However, he became increasingly aware of my difficulty with certain words, particularly in terms of pronunciation and enunciation. During these moments, he wasn't really listening to me and occasionally made jokes about it, though this was not frequent. He began to grow more confident and no longer regarded me the same way he had when we first met. He felt he could poke fun at some of my words. I interpreted this as joking. A month passed without us meeting frequently due to exams. Happily, I performed well on most of them. It is worth noting that during that time, he hardly responded to my messages on social media. The first week following the exams began as usual, but in the middle, he started mocking my pronunciation more frequently. He quickly gained the upper hand over me. He even joked about my hair in public, though no one noticed. That is not the worst of it. A week later, a group of friends he encountered at the beginning of the year sat with us during class hours. I attempted to acclimate, introduce myself, and share my academic goals. Yet, when you have anxiety and ADHD, your thoughts can become tangled, and you may use excessive words to convey a simple idea. I soon realized that his friends were rather critical individuals. The event that compelled me to write this here occurred during a class when one of his friends said to him, just near me, "How long have you known this person?" We're not really friends, we just know each other from a few months ago," he replied while chuckling. Okay, is it just me? Or is he merely someone who fills a gap when you're at university and will be forgotten when you see your friends outside? What are you implying? He responded. Afterward, this individual spoke to me and inquired, "Do you know what it means to fill a gap?" I apologize for not knowing how to translate that into English. I replied, "Yes, please do not underestimate my intelligence," to which she laughed. Subsequently, they began talking amongst themselves for the rest of the classes a few days, while I had little to contribute and was somewhat fatigued. I simply wanted to listen to the professors. I then began to overhear one of his friends, I'm not sure if they are truly friends, saying, "He's awkward, did you see?" What shocked me was his lack of reaction to those comments. He appears to be the kind of person who, upon noticing even a hint of weakness, dives in, or perhaps I am simply overreacting. I don't know. So my question is, should I begin to distance myself from him? His friends have already labeled me as shy and awkward. Consequently, I am asking, is this a red flag? As you might note, this question is somewhat rhetorical, but I am unsure how to articulate my feelings. Thank you very much for taking the time to read my message. I greatly appreciate it. Summary: I have ADHD and generalized anxiety disorder, and I am spending time with someone who seems to be getting the better of me. His friends spoke negatively about me behind my back, and I suspect they are toxic. I am unsure how to detach myself from this situation. I have been at university since this summer and fear being labeled as awkward. My anxiety is on the rise. Edit. To address the length of our relationship, as per the sub-rules, let's say 2 months, 3 if you include the exam period, and 4 if you take into account that I have known this person for a little while. If there are any errors in my English, I will attempt to correct them as soon as I can. My post is lengthy, but I included everything that was on my mind. Just one more thing. We may follow significantly different courses next year compared to this year.